I'm back. I had a max limit on my chapter 6 video, so it cut me off. And wouldn't it be nice? I'm sure some of you might think if I could just hit that button in class and she'd stop talking, but that's not the case. So you get it for here, but not going to get it all the time. So we're going to start talking about chapter 7. I'm not sure where I got cut off, but I wanted to start by saying this is where we look at how we regulate trade in e-commerce. And we have two groups or organizations that we're going to study or really look at, and that's the International Monetary System, and then we're going to look at the World Bank. So we used to have what's called a gold standard where we traded our money or traded with gold, and our currency was secured with gold. That created what we call a fixed exchange system, which is what we used to have many, many years ago. And so transacting gold was expensive because you had to ship it across. There was pirates. There was transporting it. That was an issue. Whether unable to be certain there wouldn't be any natural disasters that might happen, and obviously you couldn't earn money on that interest as it was being transported across the pond. So the collapse of World War I was economic pressures that were caused between allies and central powers. They adapted, and then it collapsed again in the Great Depression. So what we had after World War II was the Bretton Woods era, where 44 countries joined and came together to create a plan for how they were going to repair and really reconstruct the war-torn countries. And so it was decided that they would go ahead and form, and it was looking at, as I said, repairing or reconstructing the war-torn countries. What we had out of the war, the Bretton Woods era, was the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Now, this is now known as the World Bank. So this was in 1944. I think the World Bank transitioned very, very shortly after that. Now, we have three pillars, or what I would call affiliate organizations in the World Bank. So it started as the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and then once those war-torn countries were back on their feet and had their infrastructure repaired, we needed to keep moving forward. And so what they decided was that we would create three affiliates. We have the International Development Association, which was formed in 1960, and that's really a way for us to look at how to help underdeveloped countries. Those are soft loans, and a soft loan by definition means there is a significant chance that this loan will not be repaid. It also is usually carries a very low interest rate and a somewhat flexible payment plan back with a lot of typically renegotiation and extensions of those loans. So that's what we have for the broad vision of the World Bank in terms of the International Development Association. Now, the International Development Association states that the loan must be for something that will help the country. So, for example, they might give a $25 million loan to Guinea to help their water system. So it's really to benefit the common good. There are questions that usually surround this, such as do they help with vaccinations and that's usually left up to the World Health Organization. So what we're really looking at is long-term sustained progress that will help build the country into a developed state. Now, the next area or affiliate is the International Finance Corporation, which was founded around 1956. It has a much narrower vision than what we just discussed in the Development Association, and it really promotes development in the private sector is what it typically does in a developing country. It acts like an investment banker for a country or for a company. So you might decide that you want to open a lumber company in Puerto Rico, let's say, now that there are a lot of downed trees and power lines, and you would want to look to improve this country through your development. So you might go to the International Finance Corp for some investments. Now, the Multilateral Investment Agency, is also a narrow vision, and they really are more of a private investment insurance for the perceived risk that might be included in going into an underdeveloped country. So essentially, they're really insurance to carry and cover the risk that's involved. So it encourages private sector to invest in developing countries and really limit or minimize the perceived risk that might be associated with it. So those are the 3 affiliates that came out of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and that is now called the World Bank. Now I want to go over here and I want to go with you to the World Bank organization's website and encourage you to look at more of what's going on inside. And it's not going to let me extend my range, so you need to go here and look at what the World Bank's mission is. And there are 189 member countries. This does fluctuate based on the membership. And the money that's created or pooled to get loans to be able to give to countries or investment banking situations is really through the memberships, that the subscriptions that the member countries contribute. So this is the World Bank. I would encourage you to look around in here. They will be meeting in April, and we probably will talk about this in class as we get closer to it for their annual meeting. So back to our notes here. Those are the 3 affiliates that I really want you to take something away from. If you do go into the website, you will see down here that we have actually 5 that they mention on their website. But the 3 primary ones are the ones here in the middle. And then obviously, if you look over here to the far right, we have the Center for Disputes. So the IBRD is still there, which is how it started. It did evolve into the World Bank, and then it created those 3 affiliate organizations. So moving on, we will talk about the International Monetary Fund, and sorry about this little hiccup. And the International Monetary Fund is really how we look at regulating our monetary system. So we're going to skip through some of this here, and I'm just going to go ahead and show you a video after I talk to you briefly about the International Monetary Fund. And it really is intended to promote international commerce after World War II. It does have the oversight of allowing currency to be exchanged for foreign currencies freely and without restriction. And it does look for indicators of economic downturns or risk that might be included by looking and monitoring and following the currency systems of countries and the actual trade that happens. So I want to go over here and show you this real quick video that I think is excellent. I can find it here. I had it. So I'm going to try to capture this video on my recording.
Confused just by their names. The IMF and the World Bank are closely linked. So close that their headquarters are across the street from each other here in Washington. So what's the difference between them? It all started at this hotel in New Hampshire in July 1944, where 44 countries gathered for the Bretton Woods Conference. The goal of the conference was to agree on a new framework for the international monetary system, which is the rules and institutions that keep the global economy running smoothly. After World War II, most people agreed that the old system had failed. It had seen the Great Depression, unfair trade policies, and unstable currencies. After 3 weeks of heated negotiations at Bretton Woods, especially between Keynes, who was representing the United Kingdom, and Harry Dexter White, the U.S. Treasury representative, a deal was reached. The agreement created the IMF and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, soon to be known as the World Bank. Each institution was given a distinct role. The IMF's job was to oversee a system of fixed exchange rates, which tied the value of a country's currency to the U.S. dollar, which was pegged to gold. The main purpose of this was to make sure exchange rates stayed stable to encourage global trade. The IMF was also tasked with providing short-term loans to countries struggling to pay their debts. Meanwhile, the main goal of the World Bank was to give financial assistance to countries, mainly in Europe, that needed to rebuild after the war. The roles of both the IMF and the World Bank have changed a lot since the days of Bretton Woods. President Nixon unpegged the US dollar from gold in 1971, essentially dissolving the fixed exchange rate system that the IMF oversaw. Since then, the IMF has taken on a bigger role fighting financial crises around the world. It keeps tabs on the global economy and puts economic policies in place in member countries. The World Bank focuses its efforts on development and reducing poverty. It provides funding and resources in projects in some of the poorest countries in the world. Both institutions include 189 member countries, but the IMF has around 2,700 employees, compared to the World Bank staff of 10,000. The IMF is funded mainly by quotas, basically subscription fees from member countries. It receives around $675 billion in quotas, with the US, Japan, China, and Germany contributing the most. The World Bank is financed mostly by issuing bonds to global investors. The group's lending commitments reached nearly $59 billion in fiscal year 2017. The IMF has committed $160 billion under its current lending arrangements. Today, the IMF's biggest borrowers include Greece, Ukraine, Portugal, and Pakistan. The places where the World Bank is running the most projects are in Africa and East Asia. One thing the IMF and the World Bank have in common is that they both have some opponents. Critics point to the conditions attached to their loans, saying they don't always address the specific economic issues within a country. The IMF has come under fire for continuing to bail out Greece, even as the country has failed to clean up its finances. Human rights groups have criticized the World Bank for ignoring the environmental and social impacts of some of its projects in countries like Ethiopia or Myanmar. But the IMF and the World Bank say they promote global economic stability. They make countries less vulnerable to crises, promote higher living standards, and provide vital help to countries that need it.
Okay, that is a great video that I think is valuable and really shows the difference in the two organizations. Not able to move my screen now. So I'm just going to finish up here, and thank you for your patience as I stumble and fumble around my notes in this hotel room trying to make a video lecture so that you have something to grab and understand all of this. I'm going to put a few articles up, and so I wanted to call those to your attention as well. And the first one is what I just showed you, and that is one I'll put up there. But there's also some interest in understanding the dollar. So I talked briefly about our dollar being tied to gold, and we typically are the currency that everyone pegs themselves to. But what does it mean when our dollar is weak and our trading is affected by that, or our dollar is strong? And so this is an article that I'm going to put up for you regarding understanding the dollar. And there was another one that I'm also going to put up, but I'm not seeing it here right now. And so with that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and post them and ask that you look at them. So actually here it is here. If we look at this one here, actually it's right here. Here it is. Learning about a strong versus a weak dollar. Just a quick, very easy read on understanding what it looks like for a strong versus a weak dollar. I would encourage you to think about the implications of a strong dollar versus a weak dollar in terms of tourism, in terms of trading, and those kinds of things that are affected by a dollar, and the weakness or the strength of the dollar. And it's quite the conversation nowadays too, as we look at trading and some of the tariffs and what our economy actually looks like in terms of its strength. So that's really all I have for you tonight. And in closing, I would say please look over the balance of payments, and that's kind of our checks and balances that we have in terms of understanding and looking for tremors in our economy and trying to predict some downturns and create things or put things in place that maybe get those stopped or slow them down so that we can stay a strong economy. And that's really all I have for you at this point. So make sure you look over Chapter 6 and 7. As a reminder, Chapter 8 is going to go away, and we're not going to be looking at that. I will see you on March 21st. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you so much for your flexibility, for your, I guess, forgiveness in me not being the best, quick, get to the point speaker on audio, recording myself.